Welcome to AdvSouthAfrica. I'm Rob, and today we're doing an installation video on the Yamaha TTR110. We're going to be doing a shift shaft brace, a sprocket cover, as well as a skid plate. I want to show you guys exactly how to install it and what Newton meter to spec all the bolts to, so that we know that the fitment is done right and it's nice and easy. We're busy working on Shane Bainham's bike, number 501. It's quite an exciting bike to work on, so let's get into it. As you can see here, all the mounting hardware is included, stainless steel bolts at the correct length, so we know that the lengths are right, and we'll obviously be talking them to spec. Another thing that's worth noting is that in the title description I will be putting a timestamp, so you can go from the skid plate to the sprocket cover to the shift shaft brace as you want. So let's start off with the skid plate so we can get it up onto a center stand and then work on the rest. Woo! As far as fitment goes, we've got a number 5 Allen key, we've got a 13 socket, a 12 socket, 13 spanner as well as a 12 spanner. We got a ratchet, a torque wrench, and then also we've got a 10 and an 8. So that will be able to do absolutely everything from removing the old parts to fitting the new ones. So to remove the old skid plate, we're going to go ahead and remove these two front bolts that hold the foot pegs on. You'll see the actual old skid plate goes in between the foot pegs and the engine itself. So just to be sure, we've actually got spacers that we'll be putting in there just to replace the thickness of the old skid plate, as well as undoing these two front bolts. There's one and there's one. We'll pull all of those off, and the rear bolts for the foot pegs we're just going to loosen, but we'll leave them in. So this is the 12mm socket. And the reason we have a spanner is because this bolt on the left is unfortunately not accessible with a socket, so we'll just go in with a spanner and loosen that up. These bolts can also just be placed one side, and now the ones behind it will just get loosened, but not all the way. Okay, now that that's loose, this should want to slide out. There we go. Ooh, a little dirty under there. Okay, and while we're in this angle, I can show you a little bit better. We're going to take our washer and we're going to slide it in there, and that will take up the space of where the old bash plate was. Just because when I was first prototyping and we tightened down, I saw there was a slight gap there, so I think the way the bottom of these blocks has been machined, it does need a spacer, so that's in there at least. Okay, so for our 2 foot peg bolts, they have the chamfer on it. We're going to just put a little dropper Loctite on each one just to make sure they don't move. We really don't want those tearing out. Okay, so first things first, we're going to grab our 2 front bolts. I'm just going to bring it up to the front of the motor here. Tighten those on. Not all the way, just enough that there's a little bit of movement. So maybe about halfway. It does help to just be able to move around the bike a little bit. Okay, front bolts are about halfway. Let's go ahead and put our little bit of Loctite on. Let's go ahead and put our chamfer bolts in. We're going to be doing everything hand tight for now, just to make sure that we're not cross threading anything. Then we go and set our torque wrench to 22 Newton meters for these 8mm bolts. A little bit more. There's 22 on the money. I'm going to go in here. That one's torqued down to spec. That one's torqued down to spec as well, so we know those are tight. While we're at the back here, let's go ahead and torque the rear bolts, the 12mm bolts on the back of the foot pegs. Make sure those are also 22 Newton meters. I'm just going to hand tighten them back up as far as I can. There we go. Now let's get these torqued. Here's the first one. There it is. The 2 back ones are torqued. Let's focus on the front. Now unfortunately we can't get to this top bolt with a torque wrench, but we're just going to tighten it down a little bit. If you think it's going to vibrate loose and you don't want to over tighten, you can use a little bit of blue Loctite. It will keep it there and keep it out of trouble. If you can get your torque wrench to fit you, 22 Newton meters as well. There we go. Okay, that's been torqued to 22 newtons as well. The skid plate install is now complete. Woo! I love being able to put a bike on the center stand. Lets you do your chain maintenance nice and easy, as well as your oil service. You can see the bolts easy to access there while the skid plate's on. No need to remove that sort of stuff. Now, let's get to fitting that shift shaft brace as well as the sprocket cover. Woo! Okay, first things first, we're gonna go ahead and remove the shift lever. That's nice and tight on there. Just remember what angle it was before you remove it, just so you know exactly what position to put it on afterwards. Also, if you guys want to get any of these parts, you can go to Rogue Mini's website. It will be linked below. You can grab them from there. Okay, so you can see we removed these two bolts from here and here. This is for the shift shaft. Okay, same thing for the sprocket cover. For the shift shaft brace, we're just going to slot our two bolts in, turn that upside down, add our spacers, and then we're going to just go ahead and slot that straight on. It's going to be a reasonably snug fit so that the shaft really has no movement. Okay, now when it comes to torquing these, we're going to go over to 10 Newton meters of torque. Just that. There it is, 10 Newton meters of torque. Lock that in. There it is. There it is. And I'd say the sprocket cover is the easiest part. Just takes two bolts. Nice and easy to line up. Here we go. Give the click. Now we just need to put our shift lever back. Let's get that on there. Make sure it lines up with where it did before. Perfect. Well guys, that's how easy it is to fit the AdvSouthAfrica protective parts to the Yamaha TTR110. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, thanks for sticking around guys. Peace.